Poetry. The word makes some people cringe, makes some people shrink away, makes some people shrug their shoulders like it's pointless. Why do we study poetry? Why do we read poetry? What is the purpose of poetry? Well, better men than me have tried to explain why we study poetry. So let's look at some poets' perspective on poetry. The first one is by James Branch Cabell. He says, poetry is man's rebellion against being what he is. Poetry is man's rebellion against being what he is. Another great one. Mathematics and poetry are the utterance of the same power of imagination, only that in the one case it is addressed in the head, in the other to the heart. It's Thomas Hill said that. So poetry very much doesn't necessarily tell us what happened, but how what happened made us feel. How we feel as a result of the ebbs and flows of life, right? And it's meant to capture that element of the human condition, as all literature is meant to speak to the human condition. Poetry, more than anything, speaks to the feelings of the human condition. Okay? This is a quote from a movie called Dead Poets Society, which, hey, you're on quarantine, you should check it out. It has Robin Williams in it, who you may or may not know. He died some years ago, but he was a fantastic talent. This is one of his more serious roles, where he plays an English teacher who inspires this group of students in this Dead Poets Society. Fantastic. Here's a quote from it. He says, "We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. And medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for." Quote from Dead Poets Society. You should definitely check it out. I'm sure it's available on one of the streamers. So in that, today we're going to be looking at a narrative poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson, one of the most famous people, actually, of his time. He's from the Victorian era, which is the 1800s. And he was, I read in my book, that he was one of the most famous people next to Queen Victoria and the Prime Minister of England. It was then Alfred Lord Tennyson. He was a celebrity poet. And if we think about narrative poetry, his poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, tells a story. It tells a story, but it tells how it felt to be there. It just doesn't just tell us what happened. It tells us how it felt when it happened. Okay? So we're going to read it through once, and then I want to tell you a little bit of the history, what it's talking about. It takes place during the Crimean War. Has very little relevance for us, right? But it speaks to a deeper element of the human condition. All right? So I'm going to pull it up on my screen and follow along. We'll read it through once, we'll talk about it, and then we'll read it through again at the end. Okay? This is a website that if you have an interest in poetry, if you have an interest in what we're talking about today, move me around a little bit, it is just a wealth of poetry by all these different poets. You can look it up by poets, you can search by poems. Anyway, this is where we have found The Charge of the Light Brigade. Okay? This is him. This is Alfred Lord Tennyson right there, looking all dapper. Okay. So, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. "Forward, the Light Brigade! Charge for the guns!" he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward, the Light Brigade! Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabers bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made! All the world wondered. Honor the charge they made. Honor the Light Brigade. Noble 600. Okay, so looking at it first, it's called the Charge of the Light Brigade. The Light Brigade was a cavalry in this war that charged in. Okay? Onward, they charged into the valley of death. This foreshadows that this is not going to go well for the Light Brigade, right? 600 of them. They wanted them to charge for the guns to the valley of death. The second stanza says, was there a man dismayed, not though the soldier knew someone had blundered? So dismay, if you don't want to do something, you don't want to charge in this case, these soldiers charging in, and they said the soldiers knew that someone had blundered. A blunder is a mistake, right? That a higher up had sent them in and made a mistake because they weren't going to come back from this. And this is Alfred Lord Tennyson's ode to this Light Brigade, who followed orders, did what they were told. Theirs was not to make reply, theirs was not to reason why, theirs was but to do and die. The valley of death wrote the 600. Note that repetition. We talked yesterday about repetition is a poetic technique. We have this repetition of into the valley of death rode the 600. It ends both of the first two stanzas. It ends the third stanza. Okay. Then it ends the fourth stanza, but it's different. It says, then they rode back, but not the 600. So we have the power of repetition, and then when you turn that repetition on its head and twist it just a bit, it has a powerful effect. In stanza 5, all that was left of them, left of 600. Okay? It's repeated all the way through. 600 ends every one. The first three stanzas are all the same, but then it changes, right? It changes after the battle. All right, let's go back to stanza 3. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. If you're volleyed by fire, by cannon fire, I mean, it is throwing you for a loop. It is throwing you to the side. The thunder, we can imagine the sound of these cannons. The shot, the shell. It says, boldly they rode and well. So they just charged into this cannon fire. Their mission was to take out those cannons, and they're just riding right into them, and they're just getting mowed down into the jaws of death. We see death personified with these jaws that this cavalry is riding into the mouth of hell rode the 600. We get details about the battle. Flashed their sabers. Their sabers are their swords, right? Flashed are all their sabers bare. Flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army. Well, all the world wondered. All the world wondered how men could be so brave to charge when the odds are so much against them. They're going at these cannons with swords. And they take some people out. They do. But their bravery is why the world wonders, right? They're plunged in the battery smoke, so we can imagine the smoke everywhere. They can't see anything. Right through the line, they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. These were the people they were fighting. Shattered, sundered. Sundered means you've been cut in half. Okay. Then they rode back, but not the 600. So the cavalry had come in to save this group that was in this terrible location. Some of them rode back, but not a single member of the 600 of the Light Brigade. Cannon to the right, cannon to the left, cannon behind them volleyed and thundered. We get that repetition. Stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of the 600. Wonderful rhyme in this poem, wonderful cadence to it. The meter, the rhythm of the poem speaks to a great effect. And he asks in the final stanza. The final stanza it provides the shift, right? The first three is about the charge. 4 and 5 were about the actual battle, and we know that not one of them survives by the end of stanza 5, and then stanza 6 shifts, and so we get kind of a reflection. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. So their glory, has it faded? Perhaps. People are still reading this poem, though, and people go back and read the story of the Light Brigade, even now, 150 years later. So as long as this poem survives, their glory has not faded. When can their glory fade? That wild charge they made. He says, honor the charge they made. Honor the Light Brigade, the noble 600. He has this call to action at the end to honor the sacrifice of the soldiers who are fighting for the freedom of the Britons. Honor that charge that they made. Okay. Now I want to read the true historical account of what happened, right? Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson tries to capture what it felt like to be there, what it felt like to be a member of that cavalry that was charging into the jaws of death, charging down into this valley that they were not going to come back from, that they knew they weren't going to come back from, that they knew their commander had made a terrible mistake in sending them in there in the first place because they were all going to die, but theirs was not to reason why, theirs was but to do and die. Very famous line. It was even quoted in X-Men the Animated Series back in the day by Beast. The very smart and literary member of the team. So let me pull this up. Here's some information about the Light Brigade. The poem was first published in 1855 in a magazine called Maud. And it tells the story of the failed charge of the British cavalry in the Battle of Balaclava in October 1854. Britain was fighting with France, Sardinia, and the Ottoman Empire against Russian forces in the Crimean War, which is about control of the Dardanelles, a narrow sea strait in Turkey. If the Russians had power over the Dardanelles, British sea routes and trade would have been threatened. Okay. It says, although it is unclear who was actually responsible, a cavalry group. Cavalry means they're riding on horses. Okay, I didn't explain that before, but if you don't know, cavalry is people on horses. A cavalry group, the Light Brigade, led disastrously by Lord Cardigan, who miraculously survived, was ordered to attack a very strongly defended Russian position. His account to Parliament reads, so we have an actual historical document here of him telling Parliament what happened. Okay, so this is his version, and then we have Alfred Lord Tennyson's more poetic version, which shows what it felt like, right? This is a historical document to see what actually happened, though. And between the two, we get a feeling of what actually happened with the Light Brigade. Lord Cardigan says, we advanced down a gradual descent of more than 3/4 of a mile, with the batteries vomiting forth upon us shells and shot, round and grape, with one battery on our right flank and another on the left, and all the intermediate ground covered with the Russian riflemen, so that when we came to within a distance of 50 yards from the mouths of the artillery which had been hurling destruction upon us, we were in fact surrounded and encircled by a blaze of fire, in addition to the fire of the riflemen upon our flanks. As we ascended the hill, the oblique fire of the artillery poured upon our rear, so that we had thus a strong fire upon our front, our flank, and our rear. We entered the battery. We went through the battery, the 2 leading regiments cutting down a great number of the Russian gunners in their onset. In the 2 regiments which I had the honor to lead, every officer, with one exception, was either killed or wounded, and had his horse shot under him or injured. Those regiments proceeded, followed by the second line, consisting of 2 more regiments of cavalry, which continued to perform the duty of cutting down the Russian gunners. Then came the third line, formed of another regiment, which endeavored to complete the duty assigned to our brigade. The duty assigned to our brigade. This duty was a suicide mission. A suicide mission that row after row, the first line, the second line, the third line, gets cut down. And they didn't question why. They did what they were supposed to have done. They did what they were commanded to do. Let's read it one more time, now that we know a little bit more of the story. I'm just going to read it all the way through, beginning to end. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward, the light brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward, the light brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. The valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode, and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode the 600. Flashed all their sabers bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army, while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honor the charge they made, honor the light brigade, noble 600. Okay. So I want you to notice the way that we go from the historical account to the poetic account, and the way that Alfred Lord Tennyson tries to capture the emotion, the feelings, what it felt like. That's what poetry is about. Poetry is not about what happened, but how it felt when it happened. Poetry isn't about what you are, but how it feels to be you. Okay? So think about about poetry, and if you've hated poetry in the past, if you didn't get it, just know that you will keep at it. I want to finish with a quote by another poet about poetry. This is all from your Springboard textbook, by the way, which you might want to dust off because we're going to be using it a little bit here. Charles Simic. He said, "Poetry is an orphan of silence. The words never quite equal the experiences behind them." I think that no other poem could illustrate that point better than the Charge of the Light Brigade, right? We get the emotion from the poet, but nothing compares to having been there. Nothing compares to having been a soldier charging into this suicide mission, charging at cannons with a sword. So think about that as you are reading the comprehension questions. They will be posted. They'll be due when you turn it in, next week sometime. It's fine. And there's just a few comprehension questions. Easy peasy. It's an easy 100 in daily. So get that done. Analyze the Charge of the Light Brigade. And on Monday, we will move on to our next poem. So we've covered narrative poetry with Charge of the Light Brigade, and after that, we will be moving on to another type. Okay? Have a great weekend, guys. Enjoy your Friday off tomorrow.